Does making amends decades after a wrong choice fix anything? Can having children actually be immoral? And what two women with Toledo connections have played a part in the history of humanism? All of that coming up on Glass City Humanist right now.
Glass City Humanist is an outreach project of the secular humanists of Western Lake Erie, building community through compassion and reason for a better tomorrow.
Welcome to another episode of the Glass City Humanist. As always, I'm Doug Berger, your host. And first of all, I wanted to point out that today is the debut of our new cover art. Those that are watching this podcast on video will see it in the background behind me. Other people will see it in their podcast players when they're playing the audio version. It's something that I created myself. So please be gentle. And basically what it is at the top is red text, Glass City. And there's an outline of a bridge. And then below that is the word humanist. The outline of the bridge is what we call here in Toledo, the high level bridge. It's the Anthony Wayne Bridge. It's one of 3 or 4 bridges that cross the Maumee River. And it was, it kind of looks like the Ambassador Bridge that crosses the Detroit River that goes from Detroit to Windsor, if people are familiar with that bridge. Anyway, so Toledo lacks really any real landmarks, because when you look at New York City, they've got, the Empire State Building. Before that, they had the Twin Towers before 9/11. Detroit has the Renaissance Center, the Ambassador Bridge. Toronto has the CN Tower. Toledo really doesn't have much. The high-level bridge is one landmark, and so I decided to include that. It's not much if you have to explain it, but there it goes. So I hope you enjoy it, and please send me some comments, whether you like it or not. We could go back to the old one. I've also have another one that I created, but I want to stick with these for right now. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you today about was, does making amends decades after a wrong choice fix anything? And how I came up with that topic was that what I like to do in the evenings is watch TV. I watch a lot of TV, especially with the pandemic. That was pretty much the only thing you could do. And one of the shows that I watch is the reboot. Well, it's been on for several years now, several seasons, but it was a reboot of the TV show SWAT that I enjoyed in the 70s when I was a kid. And I really shouldn't have, because it was the old show was really, really violent and dark and very rough. But this new one, they try to do better with that. Now, a lot of these cop procedural shows were affected by the protests in 2020, the reallocate the funding for the police movement that came after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. And so a lot of these TV shows have had to kind of refocus on what they do. It's not anymore slam bam violence and you do this, and they're trying to balance how real police work should be going and also highlight every once in a while you have the bad apples, because again, not all police officers are bad apples. It's just the problems that we have with the police, and many people in minority communities have problem, are when the bad apples aren't dealt with. All right. So a lot of these cop shows, they try to toe that balance of, showing real police work, and also showing the warts and all. So what they did was, this recent episode had a woman who was a candidate to come on to SWAT. Currently, the cast includes one woman. Her name is Chris. She is already on the SWAT team. And so anytime that a woman becomes involved with the SWAT team, she takes a special interest, as women are wont to do. Men do that too. Just kind of, take new people under their wings or whatever. And so there was this thing about sexism and the old boys network, and they got to talking about what the men called hazing or razzing or playing pranks, and the women call harassment, because it was. The old boys network would harass these new women recruits, and a lot of them would quit. So Chris wanted to prevent that from happening. Then this other character, Jim Street, we come to find out, when he worked at a previous police department in nearby Los Angeles, he had taken part in harassing a new woman recruit to the police department, putting naked pictures in her locker, catcall, the whole 9 yards, and he went along with it. And Chris kind of let him know that wasn't cool. It wasn't cool then, it's not cool now. And he had an epiphany that, he says, I was being a total jerk back then. So it got to him. It really got to him, to where he decided that he was going to reach out to this woman police officer that he had harassed back in the day and apologize. Sounds good. Well, he comes to find out that she had, shortly thereafter, had left the force. She'd quit. And she was the owner of a surf shop in downtown Los Angeles or somewhere close by. So he decides that he's going to make amends. He's going to see her and apologize. So the first thing he does, naturally, is he calls her. And it's an awkward call, because, he's coming at it from, hey, I messed you up. He goes, I want to talk to you about your time on the force, and wonder if we could talk it over. And she's like, well, I'm here at the store all the time. I don't have time. He says, well, I'll come by. And she says, we close at 9, and she hangs up. You could just tell it was a really awkward phone call. She didn't want to talk to him. You could tell. So he's like, kind of wondering why that is. And so he still goes through with it, and he goes one evening to this surf shop, and she knows immediately who he is, why he's there, and he attempts to make amends, to apologize for his behavior when they worked together. And I'm sure this is probably 10 years before this part of the show, or sometime in the past. And she basically tells him, I'm not forgiving you. What you did was terrible. And he said, I heard you quit the force. I hope it wasn't because of me. And she says, yes, it was because of you and all of it. She had been piled on by all these macho men, police officers, thinking that they were God's gifts to women. How dare a woman be on our police force? And, and really letting her know it, and playing pranks and all this stuff. And he was like, and Street's like, oh. And he apologizes again. And she says, if you're looking for forgiveness, she says, I can't give it to you. She says, I'm glad that you've grown, but that's it, have a nice day. And so he ends up leaving. And so it got me thinking, and I was talking it over with my fiance, Sean, that is there a point that decades after you make a poor choice, let's say you harass somebody, you bully them, is there a point where if you try to make amends, if you try to apologize, it's just not worth it to meet that person that you caused harm to and apologize? And my take on it is that I was growing up in elementary school in particular, I was the target of some malicious bullying because of my weight, because my last name was Berger, because I was poor, all kinds of stuff that they could find out, personal things about me, that my father had died in Vietnam. So they called me a bastard. It was just malicious. And I was thinking that I wouldn't want to hear from any of those people today. They'd be my age, 50 something, 50 something. They would be, 30 years, 35 years out of school. And I don't know. I probably would not appreciate somebody coming up to me today and saying, Doug, back in elementary school, I bullied you. I'm sorry. Because the first thing I would be like, well, you've known it was a bad thing to do. You knew it was bad the day that you did it. And you're just coming now to apologize. I'd be like, where were you? I waited quite a long time. There was maybe one or two people, particularly in junior high and high school, that eventually apologized to me for the way that they treated me when I was younger. And I appreciated that. But if one of my biggest bullies that I won't name, comes to me or calls me up today, I'd be just like that woman in this episode of SWAT. I'd be like, if you're looking for forgiveness, I can't give it to you. That's water under the bridge. But then it got me thinking too that I actually bullied somebody when I was a kid. Believe it or not. There's this girl that we went to school with, elementary school, and I lived in a trailer park. This is probably 78, 79. I lived in a trailer park on the west side of Findlay, and we had to take a bus to school. And the bus stop, because we lived in a trailer park, we couldn't get door-to-door service, so we had to go to a spot. And they had decided that this pizza place called Jack and Doe's Pizza, it's still there, good pizza. If you're ever in Findlay, eat at Jack and Doe's. They got excellent pizza. And we would wait for the bus there because the business was closed, so there wasn't any traffic. And there was an overhang on the building, so if it was raining or snowing, we could be out of the weather a little bit, and the bus would pull and we'd get on it. Well, one year there was this girl, I can't remember her name offhand, but she had a prosthetic leg. She had either lost it in an accident or due to some kind of vascular problem. I don't remember. But she had a prosthetic leg. And it wasn't one of those blade things that you see on the Olympics, the Paralympics. This was, plastic, flesh-colored plastic with the metal frame on the upper thigh, and the knee didn't bend very well, and she'd drag it, and stomp, and we've come a long way since then. And kids would bully her, call her peg leg. And I did it too. And the reason why I did it was because they weren't bullying me. And that happens sometimes. People act and make poor choices because other people are acting and making those poor choices. And it's not, you get to enjoy that part. You get to be one of the guys or one of the people, one of the kids, and they're not focusing on you. And for me, that was a good thing. I didn't want them focusing on me. Fatso, 4 eyes, booger, whatever they could come up with. They weren't doing it to me. They were doing it to her. So I joined in. And that I'm recounting that today in 2022 says how much that affected me. It affected me. I was the bully and it affected me. Can you imagine how it affected her? And I will not try to look her up because there's just nothing I could say that it would be basically trying to make me feel better. And I think that's what that Jim Street character in the SWAT episode, he was trying to make himself feel better for being a jackass. And that is the wrong reason to make amends, to make yourself look better. What you want to do to make amends is you want to admit that you made a mistake and attempt to try to make it up to the person that you made the mistake. And it's entirely up to them whether or not they accept your amends or not. And I know that in some of those 12-step programs, making amends is part of the program. And basically, it's just acknowledging that you were a jerk and that you're going to try to do better and how can you make it up. But it has to be done closer to the time that you were being a jerk. You can't wait 30 or 40 years later and say, hey, remember back 30, 40 years ago when I did that thing to you? Hey, my bad. Because that's what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like. You're being flippant. You're like, my bad. Sorry. Are we cool? When somebody does that, my bad. Are we cool? No. People, that's why I hate bullying. Because I was a victim of it. I did it. I understand it. And that's why it's bad. It's not a part of growing up. It should never be a part of growing up. But so I just wanted to mention that show. So if you're watching it in reruns or streaming it, look that up. Look that episode. I'll have a link to the episode page on one of the sites, probably IMDb or something like that, so you can look it up on your streaming service, or I think they stream it on Paramount Plus or something like that, or look for it in a repeat coming, sometime this season. It was a really good episode, and like I said, I don't think that making amends that far fixes anything. It really doesn't. And again, if you're doing it for yourself, that's really the wrong reason to do it. You want to make it up to the person that you hurt.
Do you like what you hear? Would you like to support the show so we can make it better? You can write a review for podcast apps that allow reviews. You can share our website, glasscityhumanist.show, with your friends, and you can donate to the show using the donate link on the website. Any support is appreciated.
Another topic that I wanted to talk to you about was I had gotten contacted by a reporter at the Toledo Blade. That's the local paper here in Toledo, Ahmed Albeni. And he was doing a feature piece on a philosophy that some people have called anti-natalism. And I wasn't familiar with that term, so I had to look it up. Well, he explained what it was, and I also looked it up. And basically, it's a philosophy that some people have that bringing children into this world, having children, is immoral. And they have different reasons. The article that was in the paper was a very good article. But basically, he was trying to get the humanist take on it. He had talked to other faith leaders. He had talked to a Catholic priest, Muslim imam, a Buddhist, trying to get their take on it. And of course, that's the big thing with some religions. Procreation is the be-all, the end-all for that religion. And I can see, back in the old days, before modern medicine was really in its prime, it was very important for a lot of these families to have a lot of children because you had a farm to work and you had property and other goods that you wanted to pass on. And to be honest, some children didn't make it out of infancy. Some children didn't make it to adulthood. So a lot of these families would pump out children, 3 or 4 or 5, 6 at a time. And there's some religions that focus on that. There's religious right extremist group called Quiverful, and their basic philosophy is to have as many kids as you possibly can. Some political conservatives, religious political conservatives, also do that because they think if they have more children, they will gain more power because they will outnumber the other people that they want to be against. The people that don't believe like you do, you want to outnumber them. And so there's this group of people that they, for whatever reason, either the world is a piece of crap, a burning dumpster fire. They also talk about climate change. Is there going to be enough food and water to sustain a growing population? And there's some other reasons. I'll have a link up to the article so you can read the full article. But so this reporter contacted me and wanted the humanist take on anti-natalism. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, because I'm not familiar with the term. And so let me just read to you what the comment that I made that was printed in the paper. It said, Douglas Berger, president of the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie, said that none of his group members subscribe to anti-natalism, but that humanists in general are concerned about unchecked population growth because of the effect on our planet's resources. However, that doesn't mean they support universal childlessness, especially any kind that's imposed from above. And then they have a quote from me. We strongly feel any family planning should be up to the individuals involved without interference from the government or religion. The decision to have children or not should be based on situational ethics, such as, can I afford to bring a child into this world, for example. And so that's pretty much the humanist consensus. We are concerned about unchecked population growth, but one of the things that we don't believe in is having anything forced on us by government or religion. That's why most humanists oppose abortion laws that have been coming up in the States, especially here in Ohio. That's why humanists don't support the eugenics movement. That was a movement back in the 20s and 30s that subjectively decided certain people, for suggestive reasons, could not have children. So we don't support that. We had Margaret Sanger, who was a Humanist of the Year in the 50s, who started Planned Parenthood and came up and helped find funding and crusaded for creating the birth control pill. You know, that was because she was concerned about population growth, unchecked population growth. And so we have a strong history, humanists have a strong history in supporting an individual's choice whether or not to have children. It should be entirely up to them. And I understand people's concerns about climate change, and that the world seems like it's on fire all the time, and some of the, we have the war in Ukraine and pandemics. It's scary, and there's a lot of people that decided that they weren't going to have children because of that. And humanists, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, and the readings I've done, we're cool with people deciding not to have children. And so I thank Amends, the reporter at the Toledo Blade, for including us, including the humanist perspective. Even had my picture in the printed format. And so I have all that up. I have links to the Sholey website, where I have scans of the printed article up so you can see my picture. And so we were pretty happy to do that.
For more information about the topics in this episode, including links used, please visit the episode page at glasscityhumanist.show.
month of March is Women's History Month. And what I wanted to do with this segment is I wanted to highlight two women who have Toledo connections, who actually contributed in a positive way and in a big way to the humanist movement overall in its history. One of the first women that I wanted to talk about today is Gloria Steinem. She was a feminist. She was awarded the American Humanist Association's Humanist of the Year Award in 2012 for her work as a feminist and activist for women's issues. And I wanted to read a brief selection from her acceptance speech that she gave at the AHA convention in 2012. And she talks about why she is in the room, why she is receiving the award. And she starts out, she says, "There's an exceptional book by Sven Lundqvist called Exterminate All the Brutes, about the invention of racism to justify taking over land in Africa, in the Americas, and so on. We can still see that wherever there is more racial division, there is more sexism. Wherever there is one kind of caste system, there is another. We can exactly predict the amount of violence in a society by the amount of violence in a family, which comes up in order to control women as the means of reproduction. The more hierarchy there is in the family, the more likely people are to believe in other hierarchies based on race and class. So it is a profoundly, deeply political process, and we're still experiencing the demonization of any sexual expression that doesn't end in conception and doesn't take place inside patriarchal marriage. The good news is we're communal creatures, and what's both good and bad about being human is that we're adaptable. We survive because we're infinitely adaptable. We come to feel that what we've experienced is normal, and we're vulnerable because we're infinitely adaptable. But I'm proud to be with you here, because this is a room that celebrates the invisible in our spirits and the visible in the world. This is a room that understands that what is valuable is the now, is us, that we are linked and not ranked, and that we are striving to be in a circle again, and that religion is literally the deepest form of politics in the sense of power structure. And only when we see beyond that and look at the reality of each other do we understand that there are more differences between two individual women than there are between men and women as groups. That there are more differences between two white people, actually beige, or between two African American or Latin American or Asian American people than there are between those so-called racial groups. Indeed, race itself is a fiction, a minor adaptation to climate, as we all started from the same place. And I thought that was an excellent take. It's pretty much humanism. That's what we talk about all the time. These labels and created hierarchies and trying to support women and their rights to reproductive freedom. And I thought that really made sense. So it was really good that she was given the Humanist of the Year award. Just from her body of work, she should have received one, probably before 2012. The other woman that I wanted to mention about that has a Toledo connection is Madalyn Murray O'Hair. Now, some of you may not remember her name or might not even know her name. Madalyn Murray O'Hair was a plaintiff in the case of Murray v. Curlett, 1963, that challenged Bible reading and prayer recitation in Maryland public schools. It was decided along with another case at the time, and basically what it did is it prohibited religion in public schools. Abington School District versus Shrimp, and the court voted 8-1 in Shrimp's favor, saying that mandatory public Bible readings by students were unconstitutional. Prayer in schools other than Bible readings had been ruled as unconstitutional the year before in Engel v. Vital. And so Madalyn Murray O'Hair won that case, her court case about Bible reading in schools. She then eventually settled in Austin, Texas, and founded American Atheists. Now, And you're like thinking, well, Doug, how is that connected to Toledo and to humanism? Well, growing up, she grew up, she spent her teenage years in Rossford, Ohio, which is across the river from Toledo, across the Maumee. It's where they had the glass plant, Owens Libby Owens Ford auto glass plant is in Rossford. Rossford is between Toledo and Perrysburg, so it's right there, right on the river. And she graduated from Rossford High School. So she lived long enough in Rossford to graduate from their high school. I know it's a tenuous connection, but that's it. How she is connected to humanism is a bit of a hearsay. When I lived in Columbus and was part of the humanist group in Columbus, Ohio, one of the people that was a friend of our group that came to some meetings, attended our banquets, was Frank Zindler. And Frank Zindler has written some books about atheism. He knew Madalyn Murray O'Hair personally. He worked for American Atheists for a time. He was the editor of the magazine, the member magazine. And I had a chance to talk to him. And we got to mention, sadly, Madalyn Murray O'Hair was murdered in 1995, I believe it was, by a disgruntled former employee who happened to have a long rap sheet. Very, very tragic end to her. But he personally knew her. And so we were at some event or some meeting, we were talking about Madalyn, and he told me something interesting. He was telling me that she was asked to be on the board of the American Humanist Association back in the late 60s, early 70s. I believe this had been when they were headquartered in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And so she agreed. And she didn't last very long. She only lasted a few meetings. And the reason why that she quit was because there was too many men on the board and they did not like women. They did not appreciate women being on the board. And they gave her a hard time. Maybe not harassing her or anything, but you know, when you get a group of men together and they're joking around and stuff, that's what happens. And so she ended up quitting. And that kind of caused a rift between American atheists and humanist groups. She wrote some pretty nasty diatribes against humanism. She was jealous because humanists stole her thunder from what she had planned for atheism. She was very forward thinking in that she believed that atheism was a philosophy of life. It wasn't just separation of church and state. It just wasn't, there is no God. She believed that you could apply atheism to everything in the world. It was a way of life, much like humanism is. Humanism is a secular way of life. It's not necessarily atheistic, because you could be a believer and be a humanist. But so she was kind of upset about that, and there was some bad blood, and it showed up on the American Atheist website years ago. And I had talked to one of their state directors when they had state directors. Oh, the other thing too was that they had American Atheist chapters in different cities, and for whatever mercurial reason, she decided there was going to be no more chapters, so she closed them all up. And part of that benefit was that some of these atheists went to humanist groups. That's how our group in Columbus, the Humanist Community of Central Ohio, we got an influx of people when they shut down the Columbus chapter of American Atheists. And so you're like thinking, well, Doug, how's that advanced humanism? It's just that she had the foresight, she had the vision of atheism being more than just no God. And that's one of the reasons why I became a humanist. You know, I was an atheist, but I wanted to deal and address the problems in the world, the social justice issues, and just saying there is no God, that doesn't help you address that. You have to get involved in the community. You have to stand up. You have to be an activist. like she was. She was an activist all through her life. If you go on YouTube, look up Phil Donahue. He was a talk show host back in the 70s, and he interviewed her several times. And yeah, she could be spicy. She could be spicy in her beliefs, and that's why she got the publicity that she did, because they knew that she was going to be entertaining. William F. Buckley interviewed her, and they had a tete-a-tete, and that's interesting to watch on video too on YouTube. But yeah, so Madeline Murray O'Hare was from, grew up in Rossford, graduated from Rossford High, and so that's how she's connected to Toledo.
Thank you for listening. For information about the topics in this episode, please visit the episode page at glasscityhumanist.show. Glass City Humanist is an outreach of the secular humanists of Western Lake Erie and is supported in part by a grant by the American Humanist Association. The AHA can be reached at americanhumanist.org. Sholey can be reached at humanistswle.org. Glass City Humanist is hosted, written, and produced by Douglas Berger, and he is solely responsible for the content. Our theme music is Glass City Jam, composed using the Amplify Studio. See you next time.